Hello there, welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. In the course of the hour, we'll run through all the business news stories you need to know about from across the continent. Let's start with a run through the markets here for you. So East Africa's biggest bank buying assets, its KCB, has made pretty much a final offer, if you will, for Imperial Bank, with a view to taking over most of the remaining assets. But the buyout plan, remember, doesn't include the $360-odd million or so that's currently the subject of litigation. KCB shares pretty much unchanged in trading today, but on a year-to-date basis, they're up by nearly 20%. Here's what's coming up tonight. Boeing is under pressure after admitting its software could have been responsible for the Ethiopian Airlines crash. The UK Prime Minister looks for yet another extension of the Brexit deadline, this time to the end of June. And manufacturers are showing off their best work at the Made in Kenya Festival. All right then, so let's start the hour in the aviation sector. Boeing CEO has issued an apology following the loss of over 300 lives in barely 6 months in crashes that involved its key revenue driver, the 737 MAX. Now, for the first time, the CEO of the American plane makers acknowledged that both planes experienced pretty much similar issues and they all revolve around one particular system, MCAS, the Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System, if you want to use its full name. CGTN's Yang Zhao has the details.
We at Boeing are sorry for the lives lost in the recent 737 MAX accidents. These tragedies continue to weigh heavily on our hearts and minds, and we extend our sympathies to the loved ones of the passengers and crew on board Lion Air Flight 610 and Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302.
The apology from the world's aviation giant came after Ethiopian Transportation Department released its preliminary report on the March 10th crash in Addis Ababa. And for the first time, Muhlenberg acknowledged in a short video that bad data feeding into an anti-stall system on the 737 MAX jet played a role in the crashes.
The full details of what happened in these two accidents will be issued by the government authorities in the final reports. But with the release of the preliminary report of the Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 accident investigation, it's apparent that in both flights, the Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System, known as MCAS, activated in response to erroneous angle of attack information.
Simply speaking, the MCAS system can automatically lower the plane's nose to prevent engine stalling in certain circumstances. The preliminary report didn't specifically blame the MCAS, but did mention that a doomed Ethiopian Airlines jet had repeatedly nosedived before the crash. Ethiopian aviation officials say their investigation found no pilot error.
The crew obtained the license and qualifications to conduct the flight. Repetitive, uncommanded aircraft nose-down conditions are noticed. The crew performed all the procedures repeatedly provided by the manufacturer, but was not able to control the aircraft.
The findings drew the strongest link yet between the March 10th crash in Ethiopia and an October crash off the coast of Indonesia. Both involved Boeing 737 MAX 8 jetliners. All 346 people on the two planes were killed. The investigators have recommended that Boeing review and correct a flight control unit and for other authorities to confirm changes made before the grounded 737 MAX 8s can fly again. The Ethiopian government is preparing to take legal action against the U.S. manufacturer. Yang Zhao, CGTN.
All right, so let's bring you the latest on this. From Washington, Giles Gibson joins us from that very city. So, Giles, Boeing has spent a lot of time basically arguing that their systems are not really at fault here. It seems like now they're making a 180-degree turn. What informed this change in position from the plane maker?
Well, this change of tone that we're getting from Boeing seems to be off the back of the details from the investigation that we just heard about in that report just now. That initial investigation describing how the Ethiopian Airlines plane's nose was dipping multiple times during its final journey, talking about how the pilots actually initiated the emergency procedures recommended by Boeing, but of course, as we know, those emergency procedures weren't successful. And then finally, just some absolutely haunting details in that report, details of the pilot shouting out 3 times, pull up, pull up, and of course, as we know, the plane wasn't able to pull up, and everybody on board was killed as a result.
Indeed, of course, the CEO has put out this video, has put out this statement. He says, "I'm sorry." But from a strictly legal perspective, if tested in a court of law in the United States, is that statement an apology, an admission of liability by the firm that could trigger payouts to the families of the victims?
Well, the legal jeopardy for Boeing is certainly mounting every single day that goes by. Just this week we've had details of a lawsuit that's being filed by the family of a US citizen who was killed on board that Ethiopian Airlines flight. They're filing that lawsuit in a federal court in Chicago. But looking at that statement from the Boeing CEO, it does include a heartfelt apology to the families of the victims, but it also has some very careful legal language. The Boeing CEO says that the history of our industry shows most accidents are caused by a chain of events, and that phrase, chain of events, is crucial. Boeing are trying to paint the picture of them just being one of multiple actors involved in these crashes and these disasters.
Indeed. So earlier today, though, the Wall Street Journal also reported that Boeing has found yet another bug in the 737 MAX software suite that needs to be fixed. What's the latest on that?
Ramah, we haven't got many details at all about that secondary bug. The plane manufacturer Boeing have simply said that it's a relatively minor issue. We've got some media reports suggesting that it could be something to do with the way the plane's flaps are controlled, or something to do with the flight control hardware. What Boeing are saying is that this secondary issue will also be addressed in these updates that they are working on, and that they are expected to send to the Federal Aviation Administration here in the US in the next couple of weeks.
Indeed, but and this is more of an engineering question, but given the design changes that were made to the 737 MAX, bigger engines, much further forward of the 737 airframe, which really hasn't changed much over the years, why not just remove MCAS altogether, as opposed to trying to fix a system that's, at this point, responsible for the deaths of over 300 people?
Well, throughout this crisis, Boeing have very much stuck by their MCAS system. They're saying that they're going to update it. Those updates, as I was saying, will be sent to the FAA in the next couple of weeks or so. They've also said that they brought in a system in which the pilots will be able to manually override that system if the system starts kicking in repeatedly and dipping the nose of the plane repeatedly. And also in this statement from Boeing's CEO, we have a very strong backing up of that system. He says when the MAX returns to the skies with the software changes to the MCAS function, it will be among the safest airplanes ever to fly.
Indeed. One last question for you, though, because this now does become a regulatory issue. Boeing's failures aside, the incident does make it clear that the oversight process for certifying these planes as being safe to fly at the FAA isn't working as planned. And given how dysfunctional Washington has been for years now, is fixing this oversight problem, or the lack of it, is that going to be a priority at the Hill, both in terms of more funding for the FAA and also more detailed oversight on firms like Boeing?
Yeah, Ramah, I was up on Capitol Hill last week actually reporting on a hearing that was going on in the US Senate, and the acting administrator of the FAA was being grilled by senators about one of those issues that you raised, about this issue of Boeing and other plane manufacturers really taking on a lot of the regulation tasks themselves, and then the FAA coming in at this sort of top level and approving different features for aircraft. What the acting FAA administrator said when he was asked about whether his agency could look over the entire aviation industry here in the US as a whole, he said the agency could, but that they would need an extra 10,000 employees and an extra $2 billion worth of funding.
Indeed. Let's see how all of that does play out. Giles Gibson in Washington, D.C. Thank you. Now, let's stay with that story. A lawsuit, as of course Giles had mentioned there, a lawsuit for wrongful death has been filed, but not just against Boeing, but also an aircraft part maker, Rosemount, on behalf of the 24-year-old American woman who died in the crash of ET-302. That complaint has been filed in a federal court in Chicago by the family of Samuel Stumo, who was on a work trip when Flight 302 plunged into the ground at over 500 miles an hour. This is the first lawsuit filed on behalf of an American victim of the Ethiopian disaster, as well as the first to target the plane maker and a parts manufacturer. Now, the suit contains 9 counts. It joins a growing list of legal complaints against Boeing after 2 of its 737 MAX planes crashed within barely 6 months of each other.
My wife, Nadia, woke me up early in the morning on March 10th to say that a plane crash had happened in Ethiopia. I did not believe Samia could be on that plane. I could not lose another child. But she was on the plane. I could not breathe. My son tore, paced, and sobbed. We drove 3 hours to New York City to find the earliest airplane to go to Addis.
We are one of 337 families with such huge holes because this aircraft didn't function. Samia and her fellow passengers shouldn't have died. Those in charge of creating and selling this plane did not treat Samia as they would their own daughters. We as passengers need to demand that planes be safe so that no one else dies. Profits should not come before safety, and we are making this effort here to help prevent a third crash.
And families in Ethiopia as well are also calling for justice.
The concerned bodies from the government to the airline have to imagine themselves as the victims' families. We want justice, not a delayed justice, but a quick one. I heard the full report may take 1 year, but that's too long.
China's embassy in the Ethiopian capital also held a ceremony on the 5th of April to commemorate the Chinese victims of the March 10 plane crash. Alongside embassy officials, representatives from both the Chinese Chamber of Commerce and Chinese enterprises operating in Ethiopia attended the ceremony, which took place at the scene of the crash. 8 Chinese nationals were among the 157 people, most of them Kenyans, who died when the Boeing 737 MAX 8 plane crashed barely 6 minutes after takeoff from Bola International Airport in Addis Ababa. All right, then, let's jump into some corporate news headlines. Let's start with the oil sector. Italy's Eni has carried out an internal audit in a case revolving around one of Nigeria's biggest single graft cases. According to sources knowledge of the matter, the review could prompt some management changes at the oil major. Eni and its Anglo-Dutch peer, that's Royal Dutch Shell, are currently on trial in Milan for allegedly paying over $1 billion in bribes to buy Nigeria's OPL 245 offshore oil field in 2011. The South African retailer Steinhoff has once again delayed the release of its 2017-2018 financial statements due to the complexity of the accounting and audit work required, according to its CFO. The firm said it had made significant efforts, but its 2017 group financial statements would not be released until the 7th of May, and the 2018 ones will be delayed until the 18th of June this year. Still in South Africa, Woolworths Holdings has launched a limited edition makeup line in collaboration with Beyoncé's makeup artist, Sir John. It's titled Volume 1. The makeup line is branded as being cruelty-free and vegan-friendly. The new line seeks to strengthen the chain's private label brand as well as tap more into the growing demand for more naturally sourced products that is upending industries right across the world. And finally, a federal judge in the United States has given Tesla's CEO, Elon Musk, and the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission 2 weeks to settle their differences and come up with a new resolution. The increasingly expensive standoff between the tech billionaire on one hand and the federal securities regulator on the other started last August when the CEO tweeted that he had funding secured for a private takeover of the company at $420 a share. That's a run through your company headlines. You're watching Global Business Africa. It's time for a short break. Here's what's coming up next. We'll explore Tunisia's ambitions to position itself as a hub for medical tourism. And if you love architecture, you're going to enjoy this part. South Africa wants to set up the continent's tallest building for now.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global business, only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible? And why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is CGTN. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home, and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference. Welcome back to the program. The president of the Democratic Republic of Congo, Felix Tshisekedi, has pledged to work with the US government to deliver a better and more prosperous future for the citizens of the DRC. He made those remarks during his visit to the US, where he met with the US Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo. Some of Mr. Tshisekedi's party members have described his US visit as the start of renewed ties between the two countries. CGTN's Chris Ochamringa filed this report from Kinshasa.
President Tshisekedi and Mike Pompeo expressed their common interest in working together to promote human rights, improve security, and fight corruption in the DRC. The country is reported to have lost as much as $15 billion to corruption annually during the tenure of former President Joseph Kabila. President Tshisekedi says he is committed to building transparent institutions and govern his country well. And with America's support, things could change.
Son voyage aux États-Unis
The President's visit will enable us to reinforce our relationship with America. We will work together to fight corruption, poverty, and improve the delivery of basic services.
The relationship between the US and the DRC was strained by Joseph Kabila, who clung on to power after the expiry of his presidential term in 2016. The US has expressed support for President Tshisekedi's plans of improving his country. Just last month, the US sanctioned 3 senior Congolese officials for reportedly undermining democratic processes in the DRC. The Congolese president also discussed the development of DRC's natural resources and combating the current Ebola outbreak with the US Secretary of State. Chris Ochamringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
The African Congress of Medical Tourism has opened up in the Tunisian capital. The event attracted more than 20 delegations from Arab and African nations. It's designed to develop exchange and partnership programs in health and tourism. CGTN's Anin Chouachi was there.
The African Congress of Medical Tourism AMTC Tunisia has opened in Tunis. It is organized by the Ministries of Tourism and Health. Organizers said medical tourism represents a dynamic and growing market that can place Tunisia as a reference platform for the export of health-related services.
In 2018, Tunisia attracted 500,000 tourists for medical treatment and thalassotherapy. Each foreign tourist spent about $3,500 per week. Revenues in foreign exchange from this vital industry can boost the country's economy.
The African medical event dedicated to health and medical tourism has attracted more than 20 delegations from Arab and African countries.
Benin is a developing country. Medical tourism services are very expensive in Europe. Therefore, we want to develop South-South cooperation.
International experts noted that Tunisia and other African countries must learn from the mistakes and the problems that medical tourism industry has experienced over the past 20 years.
South Africa has been a leader for some time, but for reasons of their own, they have not stepped up to take a leadership role. Maybe the time wasn't right. So somebody has to take leadership. And there are a number of ways to take that leadership in terms of international standards and best practices.
According to professionals, Tunisia now ranks second in Africa in the field of health tourism, behind South Africa. It is also the second largest thalassotherapy destination in the world, after France. The North African state aims to become one of the leaders in the global medical tourism industry. Aden Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
The Belt and Road Initiative could see related investments worth up to $8 trillion by 2020, according to some estimates. Economists meeting in Johannesburg expect the initiative to boost global trade by over 10%, impacting more than 65 countries and nearly two-thirds of the world's population. CGTN's Angela Coppola found this report from Johannesburg.
Standard Chartered Bank in South Africa hosted representatives from the Chinese business community at a briefing session on the investment opportunities within the One Belt, One Road initiative. On a continental level, there are two economic growth concerns: increasing oil prices and debt levels.
Clearly for the region's oil importers, that creates pressure in terms of inflation, so the likes of South Africa and East African economies as well. I think the other key topic area at the moment has really been debt sustainability. So if you look at the likes of Zambia, Ethiopia as well, they have borrowed quite a lot from China, and we have seen concerns around how they're going to refinance that debt and also their Eurobond debt going forwards.
As the Belt and Road Initiative expands, African countries need to understand that capital is ubiquitous and policy frameworks and reforms are a key enabler.
Labour markets, we need to be more productive, we need to be more flexible. Financial markets, we need to deepen the financial markets, we need transparency, we need clarity on convertibility, we need clarity on repatriation. I think that then puts us in a strong position, similar to other trade corridors.
The annual infrastructure gap is estimated at around $100 billion on the African continent, an opportunity yet to be fully exploited.
What the Belt and Road Initiative has done for Africa is given us another avenue to raise some of this large infrastructure finance that's needed. We've looked at some of the big projects like ports, railroads, big highways that honestly would not have been done if some of this Chinese investment would not have come in.
The Chinese have put a proposition forward. It's up to the rest of Africa to look at it and see how best can we take advantage of it. Maybe it's not optimal to approach this on a fragmented basis, but on regionalization. We can look at it from a regionalization point of view instead of sovereign point of view.
The One Belt, One Road initiative has changed the way that corporates and sovereigns are investing in infrastructure and other projects. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Now, South Africa is in the process of revamping all of its industrial parks right across the country. These industrial zones were constructed and designed to house large industrial entities in one location as it means to boost GDP growth and employment. They're also part of the government's plan to grow manufacturing and production facilities across the country. CGTN's Sumirta Naidu has the latest.
This is the new Aramco Industrial Park in the capital, Pretoria. Government spent $2 million on revamping the infrastructure. Industrial parks and special economic zones create a one-stop shop for buyers and investors.
This is the 8th industrial park that we have rehabilitated as the DTI. And these industrial parks are scattered all over the country and often have a fairly nefarious history. There are investors in place. There are economic activities already in existence, but also many of them have got potential to expand and increase their economic activities.
While government is investing in the rejuvenation of the industrial parks, it doesn't take ownership. These are public-private partnerships to help economic development. The Northwest Development Corporation will run this industrial park.
We're very excited with the input that the DTI has brought in, because the revamp of this park would contribute, I think, to the manufacturing sector. In this specific park, we've created more than 5,000 jobs, and we have about 283 units that are operating currently.
For small business enterprises, the infrastructure will assist in reducing costs. It will help with exposure. There will also be more safety.
Well, obviously from the infrastructure that we can see here at the moment, obviously from the outside fencing and what they've done, obviously to protect the businesses inside of the industrial park, it will obviously have a big influence. It would be less cable theft.
The industrial park has 283 developed units that are mostly occupied by manufacturing and commercial businesses. Only 70 units are still open for lease. It's hoped this newly refurbished industrial park will create the jobs needed in this area and support local communities. Sumitra Nadu, CGTN, Pretoria.
All right then, for those of us who are into architecture, there's something interesting happening in South Africa. A skyscraper in Sandton is said to be the highest in South Africa, and it's really close to be completed. The Carlton Centre in Johannesburg CBD has been the tallest structure there for the last 40 years, but the Leonardo, whose construction started in 2015, is about to take the crown. CGTN's Julie Shire explains.
Sandton is known for being the richest square mile in Africa. It's home to the stock exchange and will now house the continent's tallest building. Leonardo, the new kid on the block, was designed by a South African team.
It was a huge honour and an incredible responsibility to be given a job like that. And it's unusual because most of the very large jobs in South Africa are done by overseas architects that are brought in, and then there's a local architect of record. But in this case, the entire professional team is South African.
The $230 million skyscraper was born out of a failed development. It's become a silver lining in one of South Africa's worst economic periods. The construction phase created 20,000 jobs.
Building a structure that had to be 50 stories in that existing hole was quite a challenge, and began to dictate what the building looked like. So it is a beacon of hope. It's kind of in a depressed economy that South Africa's been in. It's a major statement about an optimism about the future of South Africa and its people.
In 2017, Sandton attracted around 24 million visitors. This could rise significantly when the Leonardo opens its doors. The mixed development skyscraper will host the highest hotel in Africa and a 360-degree sky tower on the top floor.
People love views. They love to get up and see where they are, and to see where the other nodes of the city are as well. And this one being the sort of the furthest north is going to be stunning, because you're also going to get that whole view into Magaliesburg and into the Pretoria area, the Tshwane area as well.
The steady rise of the Leonardo over Sandton skyline has been hard to miss. It dwarfs anything in close proximity to it. It's expected to be a hit upon completion for people wanting to catch a glimpse of the breathtaking views from the building.
But with skyscrapers going up in Kenya, Morocco and Egypt, the Leonardo's title for being the tallest in the land may be short-lived. Julie Shara, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Higher, further and faster. Right, then time for a short break on the programme. Here's what's coming up next. We'll explore why the UK Prime Minister is looking for yet another extension for the Brexit deadline. And South Korea is the world's first country to roll out proper 5G phones and networks. All that and more is coming up shortly.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. These are the stories making your headlines at this hour. Starting in France, the French President Emmanuel Macron has appointed a group of researchers to carry out a 2-year probe that aims to shed light on the role of the French army in the Rwandan genocide 25 years ago. Now, the probe comes 2 days before the country, Rwanda, commemorates the massacre in which at least 800,000 people died. In the meantime, the president of the Ibuka Victims Association is calling for the French to make the tragedy a part of their collective memory. The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres is meeting with General Khalifa Haftar over in Libya. Guterres is meeting Haftar in an attempt to de-escalate the fighting between troops loyal to Haftar and the UN-backed government that's based in Tripoli. The self-proclaimed Libyan National Army has been advancing towards Tripoli. Haftar launched the offensive in an effort to gain control of the capital. On Thursday, LNA troops took hold of Gariad, a town some 80 kilometers from Tripoli. The president of the DRC has pledged to work with the United States government to deliver a better and more prosperous future for the Congolese citizens. Felix Tshisekedi made those remarks during his visit to the US. While there, he met the US Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo. Some of Mr. Tshisekedi's party members have described his US visit as the start of renewed ties between the two countries. And finally, the United Nations has pledged to assist Somalia in dealing with the dangers posed by landmines and other explosive devices. That's a run through your headlines. Let's move on to Brexit now. The UK's Prime Minister is asking EU leaders for yet another delay in the UK's divorce from the EU. This time she's looking for an end of June exit deadline. TheresaMay says that the departure could happen earlier if British legislators do approve her plan. The European Council President has proposed a 12-month flexible postponement window. Now, after voting to leave the EU in 2016, the UK's original divorce date was set for the 29th of March. That deadline was pushed back to the 12th of April after lawmakers rejected the exit deal negotiated by the Prime Minister 3 times. The UK's Foreign Secretary Jeremy Hunt says the government still hopes that the UK will leave the EU in a couple of months. He said that it was not optimal to extend the country's departure date any further. His words are pretty much in line with the remarks from the British Prime Minister, even though, as we've just mentioned, she's now been compelled to ask for more time after Britain's divided parliament failed to approve a withdrawal deal that she has spent years negotiating.
It's obviously not optimal to have any extension at all, and we have a plan to leave the EU and deliver on the referendum result, which we put before Parliament a number of times. We still hope to leave the EU in the next couple of months. That's our ambition. Well, if we can't find a way through with Parliament, then we have no choice, but it's not our first choice. Our first choice is to leave quickly, cleanly, deliver the referendum result and allow Britain to move forward. And we're very optimistic that Britain has a very, very successful post-Brexit future, but we have this challenge of a hung Parliament that we need to overcome in order to get there.
Right then, quite a bit to get through in this latest chapter of Brexit. So let's expand this conversation. Bryony Williams is in Brussels. Richard Bestick is in London. Bryony, let me start with you. So the UK has had the better part of 2 years to sort out what sort of divorce deal they want, and they've failed so far to agree on a common path forward. As the indicative votes have shown, MPs can't even agree on what they do want. All they've said so far is what they don't want. So from the EU's perspective, why give them more time to kick the can down the road?
Well, that's what all the EU leaders will be asking themselves in the coming days in the lead up to the emergency Brexit summit here in Brussels on April the 10th. Now, this latest move by Theresa May may frustrate many in the bloc because she's done it before. She's already asked for this June extension, but it was rejected because there were fears that Brexit would interfere with those parliamentary EU elections in May. But having said that, politicians on both sides of the Channel have expressed the importance to avoid a no-deal Brexit. That's the UK crashing out of the EU without an arrangement in place. So some kind of delay could be favourable for some countries. Indeed, we've heard from Angela Merkel, the German Chancellor, this week, who says she vows to do everything she can to avoid a no-deal Brexit. And even the Irish Prime Minister, Leo Varadkar, who also wants to avoid a no-deal Brexit, he's already come out and said that Theresa May needs to put forward a credible and realistic plan to secure any kind of extension. Now, on top of all of that, it's been reported that Donald Tusk, the President of the European Council, will offer Theresa May a 12-month extension with an option of leaving the EU if a withdrawal arrangement is in place. So at the moment, there's a whirlwind of views here.
Indeed. Richard, it seems to me that the Prime Minister is trying to have a cake and eat it, because on one hand, she's asking for an extension up to the 30th of June, despite the complications that raises with EU parliamentary elections, which she says she doesn't want the UK to take part in.
Ramah, it's all about the European elections. They're at the very heart of it. The UK, as you see there, is currently due to leave on April the 12th, and as yet there's no apparent chance of that deadline being achieved. So the UK Prime Minister's have your cake alternative is to say Britain will aim for June the 30th, and if they can achieve some parliamentary agreement before then, Britain will drop out before the elections on the 23rd. It does mean, of course, that Ramah, the UK will be in the strange position of having to continue it as if it was contesting the elections. The political parties will need to field candidates and presumably draw up manifestos, all a little bit last-minute.com and with ironies. The logic is that it'll give the UK a bit more time, but as you say, Ramah, more time for what? And will Brussels give it the go-ahead? The likely outcome, Britain will be forced to go long and contest those European elections.
Indeed, Bryony, as far as irony is concerned, there's a lot more of it coming up, because the UK doesn't want a no-deal Brexit, at least not the ones who are the militantly anti-Europe. Europe doesn't want a no-deal Brexit, but the odds of a no-deal Brexit just keep rising. So given that, what preparations are being made among EU states to prepare? We're seeing assets moving right across the channel, especially outside the financial services sector.
Well, we've seen implications for businesses even before Brexit's even happened. The Japanese electronics manufacturer Panasonic has already moved its EU headquarters from the UK to Amsterdam, and we know that Sony is due to make a similar move. And now big car giants like Nissan, Toyota and Honda, who all have a huge presence in the UK, have all voiced their concerns that a no-deal Brexit will have huge financial implications for them. Now, when it comes down to EU member states, they've all been making their own Brexit preparations for the last months and years. We know that France, Germany, the Netherlands are all starting to employ more customs officials, and that staff at Spanish airports and ports will be increased if there are going to be new customs checks, because as it stands at the moment, and the UK does leave the EU with a no deal, those customs checks will be reintroduced immediately quickly. Now, the sectors and industries I've touched upon there are a small percentage of the hundreds that could be affected if there is a no-deal Brexit.
Indeed, of course, logistics will be right on the front line to that. One last question for you, Richard. 12th of April, not very far off. So what are the timelines here for talks between the two parties to end with or without a deal on the table?
In her letter to the EU, the UK Prime Minister said she'll continue to secure, quote, rapid approval if she can secure a deal with the opposition Labour Party. That's her hope, but you get the impression she'll give it as long as it takes to secure something on which Parliament can agree. One other point, Ramah, a political one. The figures from a by-election in an opposition Labour Party stronghold constituency are in and make interesting reading. Labour won, no surprises there, but the share of the vote by both the ruling Conservatives and opposition Labour are dramatically down. The share of the votes of parties promoting a second referendum or an end to Brexit dramatically up. So when Theresa May talks in her letter to Donald Tusk, the European Council President, of Brexit damage to the British politics, there's real evidence to support her contention. She's possibly talking about the damage to the two main political parties which have held sway in Britain for the last 60 years. Politically as well as economically, then, it would seem to make a lot of sense to deal with Brexit quickly. That quickly, though, might not be entirely possible.
Indeed, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. We'll leave it there for the time being. Brandy Williams in Brussels and Richard Bestick in London. Thank you very much. Now then, let's get back to some company news, shall we? Saudi Aramco, the world's largest oil-producing firm, has revealed some pretty interesting data that indicates that it is the world's most profitable company by an enormous margin. It puts Apple in the shade by, well, $50+ billion. Now, that data was contained in a prospectus for an upcoming bond issue. It's Jacob Greaves with more from Dubai.
Its wealth might be buried beneath the sands of Saudi Arabia, but now it's also available for all to see. Previously reluctant to disclose its financial details, Saudi Aramco has had to open the door as it looks to tap bond markets. The oil giant's 2018 core earnings were $224 billion, 3 times as much as Apple.
The financials look extremely healthy to us, whether you look at the leverage numbers, which look extremely low, or you look at the profitability numbers. The balance sheet and the P&L looks in a very healthy shape. Margins are stable, you have production stable, and moreover you have 3 years of data now that you have the prospectus out, right? So you have more transparency.
Despite the huge profits, credit agencies have rated it on a par with Saudi Arabia. Fitch and Moody's have graded it A+ and A1 respectively, a reflection of the state-owned oil company's ties to the kingdom's at times sluggish economy. But both have said without sovereign rating constraints, it would match better-rated international oil firms such as Chevron and Shell. Even after the recently announced stake in Saudi petrochemical firm SABIC for $69.1 billion, analysts say its balance sheet stands out.
In Aramco's case, it's actually got net cash, so it's got negative net debt, and its gross debt is fairly small. Obviously, this bond issue, if and when it goes through, will raise its net debt to a degree, but still the cash reserves are very large. Some of those cash reserves, of course, are going to be used for the acquisition of the stake in SABIC from the Public Investment Fund. So it'll move towards having less cash and somewhat more debt, but still it will have a very low net debt compared to the major international oil companies, which, as I say, have typically financed themselves rather more from debt.
Earlier this year, Saudi Arabia said Aramco's anticipated bond sale would raise $10 billion. This planned bond deal is also attracting attention as it's Aramco's inaugural transaction in international markets. That's after the firm pushed back their planned IPO for 2018, estimated at the time to be worth around $100 billion until 2021. The challenge is the fortunes of the world's top oil producer are still linked to energy prices and Saudi Arabia's broader economic development. Aramco will hope that doesn't put investors off this week as it looks abroad with a roadshow for bond buyers. Asia, Europe and the United States are said to be the main destinations. Notably, no Middle East country made the list as it looks to drill into international markets. Jacob Greaves, CGTN in Dubai.
Right then, let's talk about what's on your table for a moment, or more accurately, what might be on it in future, and sooner than you might think. Lab-grown meat. It's developed really from stem cells of animals, and for some it's the sustainable, sensible, ethical solution to the demands of the meat industry. Tissue engineering experts at the University of Bath are developing a system where animal cells are essentially grown on blades of grass. But the procedure at this point in time is relatively lengthy and costly. The production price, $20,000 per kilogram. I know it's not cheap, but consider this. Demand for meat is expected to double between the year 2000 and 2050 because the Earth's population is growing and it's going to hit about 9 billion people by that point in time. So proponents of lab-grown meat say it could be the only way to meet demand for animal protein without harming the environment.
The challenge is to grow cultured meat in a cost-effective way on a large enough scale where it can really achieve the goals of food security and addressing climate change associated with food production. So what we're working on is developing a system, a bioprocess that enables us to grow cultured meat on a large scale in a cost-effective way. So what we are doing is designing a process. The central part of that process is the bioreactor. We need to replicate the conditions found in the cow or the chicken that allows muscle to grow. So that's partly the material that it's grown on, but also the nutrient solution that's fed to it and the general environment that it's grown in, and that's the bioreactor, and that's our area of expertise, and that is how we are looking to address this scale-up challenge.
Quite a bit of debate around that particular story. Let's head over to tech. South Korea claims to be the first country to set up a 5G phone service. It's estimated that 5G and related tech could yield more than $500 billion in spending in the next 15 years. As Joseph Kim reports, South Korea hopes to be one of the biggest winners in the 5G era.
The world's first commercial 5G service. At least that's according to South Korea. The country is launching phones for what they claim is the world's first fifth-generation network.
I am very excited about this. I was told 5G incredibly lowers latencies, so I can enjoy streaming games better.
5G allows me to download big files very quickly. I can watch a movie faster without delays or buffering, and I can enjoy it all at home.
Samsung's new 5G phone carries over a whopping $1,200 price tag. The company revealed it earlier this week, just hours before carriers in the US, with the help of K-pop stars and an Olympic athlete. US telecom provider Verizon, however, is calling South Korea's move a publicity stunt.
As the world's first, diverse venture businesses, small and medium-sized enterprises and corporations will gain new opportunities in the global ICT market.
5G's superfast network will help users download speeds 20 times faster than that of 4G. It will also enhance gaming, high-quality streaming, and virtual and augmented reality. There are hopes that this will help turn around the economy, which saw its economic growth hit a 6-year low last year. And officials hope the technology will spur innovation on a grander scale. South Korea already heavily invests in smart cities, autonomous driving, and drone technology. But now that we're in the 5G era, it's expected that these areas will get even more attention from Seoul going forward. And though South Korea hopes to get a jump start using 5G, concerns are being voiced that the potential health and security risks associated with the technology still needs to be thoroughly investigated. Joseph Kim for CGTN, Seoul.
China is the largest single mobile phone market on the planet, with new models coming out pretty much every other quarter. Where do the old ones go? China now has about 1 billion or so old and unused mobile phones, and that number will rise as 5G networks come online. Now, recycling, of course, is the obvious solution, but there are quite a few challenges in doing that, as Chen Tongna reports from Shanghai.
It looks like an ATM machine, but it's not used for withdrawing cash. It's for collecting your old mobile phones. Mobile phone recycling company 爱回收 has set out some 2,000 of them in the past year, and they now account for 10% of all recycled phones nationwide. The emergence of the phone deposit boxes is a response to the desire to get old phones out of your drawers and do something useful with them.
We recycled over 10 million mobile phones in 2018, a big year-on-year jump, about 130%, thanks to rising sales of new phones.
爱回收 does two things with the mobiles it receives. Those in good conditions will be repaired, repackaged and sold again as second-hand phones. Phones that can't be repaired are stripped of useful metals that can be resold to manufacturers of other products. 爱回收 recycling volume may seem high, but it's not much compared to the rate at which China consumes new mobile phones. Overall, the recycling rate of China's mobile phones is still pretty low. Only 2% of the phones are recycled. But with 5G coming, there could be huge potential for recycling companies. The Ministry of Industry and Information Technology predicts that with the commercialization of 5G, the number of mobile phones being abandoned could reach more than 500 million by 2020. That may raise the disposal rate of old 4G mobile phones. But of course, they still could not then be used on the new 5G networks. Moreover, the financial return of breaking the phones down into their original metals is not high. A ton of mobile phones will yield 2.2 kilograms of silver, for example. That's about 700 necklaces. But to make those 700 necklaces, you need 7,000 mobile phones.
Some companies have set up recycling spots in large shopping malls. If they can turn out primarily second-hand phones, they can make money. But if they are just decomposed in raw materials, the financial returns are not high.
The recycling companies still have a few years to worry about the dilemma. Though some phone makers have launched 5G models, they have not been put into mass production yet. Research company IDC predicts that the number of 5G phones produced this year will hit 6 million, accounting for only 0.5% of all smartphones worldwide. The proportion will reach 26% by 2023. Chen Tong, ICS for CGTN, Shanghai.
All right, then a quick run through commodity prices here for you. So Brent crude still sort of hovering around that $70 a barrel level. That seems to be a bit of a hard cap at the moment. And really it is just a supply play. On a year-to-date basis, this is up by over a quarter, up 25%. OPEC is still cutting output, and there are other supply cuts, unplanned ones coming in. The power cuts in Venezuela, for instance, those are affecting output. Remember, this is a country that used to be able to pump out 3 million barrels of crude a day. Now it's doing barely 900,000 in March. Libya as well, as reported earlier, issues over there, whereas forces allied to Khalifa Haftar are advancing on the capital, Tripoli. Here's what's coming up next. Huawei is holding its annual Eco-Connect event in Johannesburg, bringing together industry visionaries. We'll take you into the proceedings when we come back.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back. Huawei has held its annual Eco-Connect event in Johannesburg this week. It brought together industry visionaries, partners and customers for an update on its plans and offerings in the South African market. The company has seen quite a bit of growth last year. It expects a further 15% rise in global growth in 2019. It says that South Africa is a key market that will play an important part in generating those returns. CGTN's Samita Naidu went along to see what's new.
It's taken Huawei over 30 years, but as of last year, the Chinese tech giant has overtaken American rival Apple in global smartphone sales. Huawei is also fast becoming the expert in smart security.
Behind the numbers is a huge investment in R&D and a huge investment into the critical technologies which will drive the world to the digital one. so including the 5G, AI, Internet of Things, big data, and cloud. So those technology across board will help the future to bring the world more digital and to explore the value from the data.
The company boasts state-of-the-art digital security and surveillance equipment to combat crime. Huawei has also introduced new innovation in IoT. And 2 new cloud centers are set to go live in Johannesburg and Cape Town this year that will assist local enterprise development. Gajima is a fully black-owned South African company, and it's just won a license to provide government with a fully comprehensive cloud solution. It was able to do that because of its partnership with Huawei. Huawei essentially is providing all of the IT infrastructure.
The launching pad of the Cheetah Cloud is around digital transformation. So how government can be accessed digitally, and also how access to information can be improved. Very important, because this now reduces the number of servers that are within government space. Then that allows government entities to secure services as they use them.
Despite clashes with the USA and UK, Huawei says it has a good working relationship with most countries, and security is an important element of its business.
Huawei looks into supporting governments and government departments like ministries, institutions and agencies and government bodies, so to speak, in what we call their digital transformation process.
Huawei has also partnered with South Africa's data-only network provider, Rain, in efforts to be the first to bring 5G to the country. The tech giant says the initiative means they are at least 1 year ahead of competitors in this regard. Sumitra Nadu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Over in East Africa, the Kenyan Association of Manufacturers is hosting a shopping festival in the country's capital. That event features, or rather covers, some 60,000 square feet of exhibition space. It aims to attract some 250,000 visitors, with a view to getting a lot more Kenyans to buy and use locally made and assembled products. The manufacturers lobby organised the event alongside Brand Kenya, that's a state-owned entity, and they're now urging the government to speed up legislation and policies that will protect local manufacturers from illicit trade. KM believes that this will enhance both local and global competitiveness of the country's products and services. KM is looking to boost the sector's contribution to GDP from around 8.4% to over 15%. And Amazon founder Jeff Bezos remains the world's richest man, even after agreeing to a $35 billion settlement with his former wife, Mackenzie. Bezos is bound to retain his voting rights and 75% of the $143 billion stake in the firm after the divorce. Now, the settlement also puts Mackenzie among the world's richest women. Her stake in Amazon is valued at $36 billion, and it's worth more than the entire market value of 70% of the S&P 500 components. Investors have previously expressed a bit of concern about the possible outcome of the split ever since the world's richest couple announced their impending divorce in January this year. Mackenzie announced she's giving up her interests in the Washington Post and the rocket company Blue Origin, which was founded in the year 2000. She is a successful novelist in her own right. She's written 2 books, The Testing of Luther Albright and Traps. Bezos is reportedly in a relationship with former Fox TV host Lauren Sanchez. And finally, a quick run through the currencies here for you as we wrap up the program. Now, the Rand has been having a rather interesting couple of days. 1406.49, it's off 30 GMT, is a relevant number that we're looking at, pretty much the same way right across the day. It's been posting steady gains against the dollar from the 28th of March. It's clawed back about 4% since then. Also over in North Africa, Egypt, its budget assumes a dollar EGP rate of about 18 for the 2019-2020 fiscal year, but the currency has been heading in the opposite direction. So far, 17.3249 was a close. It's clawed about 3% to the dollar so far this year. Those are your currencies, and that's it for tonight's edition of Global Business Africa. As always, we'd like to hear your thoughts on the content you've seen here in the last hour. There's several ways of getting your thoughts back to us, all of them on your screens right now. I'm Ramah Nyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Thank you for your company in the last hour. The World Today's up next from Washington.